Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn,
And I'm Sarah Callan.
and today we're going to be reviewing the A24 film Past Lives. Sarah, do you want to kick us off with an IMDb summary for Past Lives?
Sure. Nora and Hae-sung, two deeply connected childhood friends, are wrested apart after Nora's family emigrates from South Korea. 20 years later, they are reunited for one fateful week as they confront notions of love and destiny.
All right. So let's start off with our one-sentence summaries for Past Lives. Sarah, what was yours?
Mine is, how do you respond when the past and present collide?
Ooh, yes. This poses a fabulous question that this movie also seems to try and answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't glean how you feel about this movie yet. So good job
Yes.
building some intrigue.
Always trying to build some tension here, you know?
Yeah, I always love it when you do that, but I also am like impatient. So this doesn't bode well. I'm like, I want to know. Tell me the answer.
I mean, good thing you only have to wait like 30 to 40 more
Another 30
seconds. So you will have some self-gratification in a moment.
Oh, thank goodness. I could only wait 30 seconds. Not a second longer. um, my one sentence summary is there weren't enough in young layers for me in this movie in a past life.
Oh, I am very intrigued.
Yeah, I think this will be a really fun and interesting episode and conversation. I am so
Ah,
excited.
me too. Okay, let's go.
Okay. Because I can't wait any longer and my impatience is rising. Sarah, tell me your thoughts about past lives. And in this first section, we will not spoil this movie.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this movie, which kind of surprises me.
Yeah.
Be- because it's labeled a romance, but I didn't really like view it through that lens.
Mhm.
But yeah, this movie really worked for me. I was sucked in. Honestly, the film opens with random like bystanders people watching and playing the who do you think they are game, and that hooked me in because I love playing that game.
You
That's
felt
a
seen,
great I did. I
seen
felt
and known.
very seen. It was great. I loved that. But I think some of the themes that this film explores are really interesting to me, and I just enjoyed spending time with Nora and learning more about her and how she's just processing through everything that she's experiencing. And I like that this film really made me think afterwards and gave me some food for thought. It's just really meditative and contemplative, and I really appreciated that aspect of this film. So yeah, had a great time, would happily watch again.
Fascinating. Oh my goodness. I'm excited to dive into the things that you lingered on and your thoughts after this movie, too. It sounds like there's quite some themes that you were thinking about. Okay, well, as I mentioned in my one-sentence summary, perhaps this is the beginning of building in young layers for my future lives with this movie. I really wanted to love this movie. I have to say, I really I was excited. And we were talking about this movie for the past couple of months. When it came out, there was a lot of really great energy around it, especially in the film community. It also is just a beautifully like contemplative A24 film, which usually just absolutely tugs on my heartstrings and draws me in. But I did not enjoy this movie, and a lot of it is because of the character development. I think visually and from a filmmaking perspective, this movie is absolutely captivating. It is incredibly poetic. There's so much happening in the visuals and the score. Um, but I needed more from the characters to be grounded in the beginning of the film. And because the rest of the trajectory of the film is so anchored in these two people, that it was really hard for me to get on board with the rest of their journey that they go on. Um, there's some things and moments that happen in the third act that I just feel spicy about. So I just feel some type of way that we can talk about when we
Ooh,
get to that section.
okay.
Um, Specifically in some of the lines and decisions that Nora makes that I just was like, what are you doing, woman? Um, but yeah, I think thematically this is about an immigrant story. And I think that a lot of the framing is through these two men. Like in a lot of ways, they don't feel like they are representatives of the sides of Nora and the choices that she makes to continue to grow in one direction while acknowledging and appreciating a lot of the things in her roots of where she came from. And so I thought that was like a pretty interesting theme for us to talk about. But overall, there were moments where I found the characters that I think I was supposed to be rooting for a little frustrating in some ways. And so we can talk a little bit more about that when we get into spoiler territory.
I am so intrigued. Ugh, this is going to be a great
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. I think this will be really fun. Okay, well, let's include a spoiler here. So if you haven't seen Past Lives yet, we recommend checking it out. It's available to rent on a whole bunch of streaming platforms. Please watch this movie before continuing to listen. Okay, where shall we start first?
Honestly, I want your spiciness.
Okay,
But are you ready to start with spicy or should we build up
I
to that?
let's start there so I can unleash that and then at least
Yes.
end. Maybe we end on high. I don't know. Maybe we keep the spice. So in general, with movies that have a character who is married, really kind of entertaining many different ideas and other options and past lovers and all that kind of stuff. Like I just get fired up about. But I know life is messy and emotions are messy, and so all of that is very like I get it. I get it. I feel some type of way the whole time that I just want to yell at the characters, but it's fine. Emotions are weird and wild. And especially when it's from someone that's so deep into your past. But the bar scene. The bar scene really irked me for two reasons. One, why are they having this incredibly intimate conversation with her husband sitting right
Yeah.
next to her? I just
Mhm.
think that is so rude, disrespectful, and so not honoring of the person that you're with. I understand that these emotions are difficult, you need to like sort them out, but like maybe she felt like it was respectful because she's bringing her husband into it and they're not doing it in secretive and in private. But the whole time, I was just like, Arthur is so gracious throughout this entire
Mhm.
dang movie. He
Yeah.
is a superhero. The way that he holds space for her and allows her to process and gives her so much room to explore so many of his emotions and just kind of pushes his jealousies and his feelings for her aside in order to give her space. I'm just like, Arthur is a champ throughout this movie. But I just felt like these two people are having this incredibly intimate conversation about their future, their lives, their feelings for each other that they won't choose to continue to explore. So there's that piece. Then they do it in another language, which I think in general, when people are together and two people like speak a different language, the general respect code is like to try and speak in the collective language because it feels very othering and exclusive to just talk in your own secret language and there's some aspects of this of just there's a comfort level, there's a way that people can communicate, but when you're in a group setting, it's really rude when people do that and it gets on my nerves. So there's that whole added factor on top of the fact that they're talking about their feelings in front of her husband that I was just like, I have so many questions for both of you. Okay. And I think I hold I judge Nora more harshly for it in this bar scene conversation than him for whatever reason. And maybe I need to examine why that's the case for me. But because she is the person that is actually married to Arthur, And like,
Mhm.
this is your relationship and this is your person that you are bringing into this. So I think there's a larger responsibility that she has to put her husband in that situation. So TLDR is Arthur is the true hero of this movie, okay? His graciousness is unparalleled. Unparalleled.
Yeah, no, I totally agree about Arthur, and I do want to talk about him because I think there's some really interesting things that the film does with that character. Um yeah, that bar scene, like I totally get where you're coming from. I think I read that as like when you encounter somebody from your past again and then you just kind of like slip back into who you were when you knew them. That's kind of how I read that bar scene, was that she just got kind of caught up in it and wasn't really thinking. So I think maybe I'm maybe extending
You're
more
more
grace to her.
grace. You are.
'Cause I didn't read too much into it. I thought that she got kind of like swept up in the moment. And I mean I feel like that's happened to all of us before. Like we hang out with somebody again after so many years and it's like, "Oh my gosh, everything else kind of stops existing for a minute and you get like caught up in that." Uh and so I think because their relationship doesn't go any further than that, I'm willing to give her the benefit of the doubt, even though what she does isn't great. Like, she should have done better in that moment, but I just saw that as a really human moment that I know that I could definitely relate to, even though I haven't been in that exact situation before.
Mm, yeah. It's just so funny because the roles are flipped in us this time. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I love it.
You're like, oh, but she just got swept up in the moment. I'm like, no, you need to make better choices to honor
Yeah,
your marriage, woman.
yeah, it's
You
true.
know? And
Which,
they are both so aware. Like she says explicitly to her husband, he came here for me. And so I think I because she has some level of understanding of that and she's not absolutely clueless of just, hey, this is like we're just exploring, we're reminiscing. She's aware of what's happening and she's still choosing to put herself in these situations. Leave that door
yeah,
open, to explore that,
yeah.
to let the crack open. Like I just think that they need to do better to honor the person that they're with.
Yeah, it was even wild to me that they chose to go out and hang out with him together after
Right.
that. Like, because she comes
It's
home
so weird.
and she says, "He's here for me." And then they have that really, really honest conversation, which I really appreciated. I was like, "Oh, y'all are going some places in this
Mhm.
conversation." Uh, and then they all go out together. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is the most awkward dinner drinks thing ever," because of course there's like a language barrier and
Mhm.
all of these emotional layers. I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is awkward.
Yeah.
Why would you put yourself into this situation?" But also, I kind of get why you would put yourself in this situation. So, yeah, I wanted to get out of the dinner and wanted to get out of the bar just because of the pure awkwardness of it all.
Mhm. Mhm. Which is probably like the awkwardness we feel is like but a 0.2% of how much awkwardness Arthur is feeling.
Yes.
I just need
Yeah.
justice for Arthur, okay? Okay? There's a shot of him after that bar scene of him paying the bill, which seems to suggest that he has
Yeah.
paid the bill for them, for this man that has like
Yeah.
waltzed into his wife's life. And he is still kind and gracious and says yes when um when the, Haesung is leaving and he's like, come visit me in Korea. And Arthur says a simple definitely. I'm like,
Mhm.
lock it in, people. This is the graciousness and kindness and patience that we all need. You know, he is the true hero of this movie. It's
Yeah,
unfair to him.
absolutely. Yes. Yeah, and just his steadiness and his
Yeah.
willingness to just to like help Nora explore this part of her, even
At
though
his
it's,
yes,
yeah,
at the
like
cost to
almost at
him.
his expense. And
Yeah.
I think that that's really fascinating, and not something that you usually see in a movie. I feel like a
Mhm.
lot of times in this type of film, it's like the person goes back to their past person in secret, and then there's this like dual track situation happening. So the fact that Arthur
Yes.
knew what was going on with Nora and they were able to talk about it, I think makes me appreciate him more and makes me appreciate their relationship even more.
Yeah. That is very true. That is very true. There is a moment where she comes back from meeting him for the first time, and they're explicitly flirting the whole time. Okay. And then she comes back, and Arthur asks, "How did it go?" And there's a long pause, and my brain was like, what she says in this moment is going to be so character
Yeah.
revealing, you know?
Yeah.
Because the other version of this movie is she's like, "Oh, it's fine. We just caught up," you know? But she explicitly makes it pretty clear that there's feelings and emotions that she has and also that he has for her when she says he came here for me. So I guess that's good, although that bar seems very low. Like, good job. You didn't go and reunite with your ex lover in secret.
Yeah. Yeah, but I just loved that there was that opportunity to have that really, really honest conversation. And even though it hurt Arthur and he was feeling all sorts of big feelings during that conversation, they didn't run from that, but they ran towards each other, and they like got to have even more of a vulnerable conversation. So it was this opportunity for her relationship with Haesung to separate them, but instead it almost drew them closer together. So I really appreciated
Mm,
that scene and how that was constructed, and we got to learn more about how Nora and Arthur got together and how their relationship has evolved over time as well. So we learn their history. They have history too. It's not just Nora and Haesung that have history, but Nora and Arthur
mhm.
do too. It just looks different. And so I like that we got to see both of them almost side by side in that, brief date day into their real conversation at night.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. There's a level of openness that they can have with each other. I think also the scene with them talking in bed at night was also pretty illuminating around their relationship. Here's another moment that I was frustrated with, which is this is just gonna be me being frustrated for an hour, okay?
Yeah, I love it. It's nice to be not the one who's frustrated. I'm not gonna lie.
So he's talking about basically, are you gonna like basically leave with him and whatnot? And there's this whole other part of you that I don't understand, blah blah blah. Um, and Arthur is expressing that he sees that there's a risk here and he feels some type of way about it. And Nora goes, "I'm not going to throw away my rehearsals for some dude." And my brain was like, "Your rehearsals? What about your husband?" Like, and she says this to him? And so I just thought that was such an interesting, call it a Freudian slip or whatever it is, but there's this w weird sense of priorities in her mind, and that's the moment where I was like, interesting that I think that Arthur and, Haesung are 2 men in her life, but they almost represent different things to her. They represent different sides of her. They draw out different sides of her. And so they are in a way framed in terms of her life in America, her passions, her ambitions for writing that Arthur has supported and understands deeply versus her roots and her past in Korea. And so that is the moment that shifted for me because I was like, you've called this, you said, I'm not going to throw away my rehearsals. And mixed up into that is obviously basically this life with Arthur. But her word choice is like very fascinating to me. And I was like, I'm Arthur, I'm like, hello, hello, I'm here too. Um, and so it's like a prioritization in her mind of what life here represents to her, which includes Arthur, but really like the word she's chosen is her careers and her writing and all of that, her plays. That's what came to mind to come out in that sentence.
See, that's so interesting because I read that exchange a little bit differently
Mm-hmm.
because it's framed with like you know me, because his whole thing is like I can't access this deeper part of you, and so do I even like know you? And so then she says, yeah, you know me, I wouldn't, you know, miss my rehearsals for this dude. So i I took it almost as like an inside joke, is kind of how I read that, as opposed to I am staying because I have rehearsals. I think that that was just an example of, you know, every part of me, and this is just one thing that you know about who I am as a person. You know what drives me. You know how much I care about the life that we have made together. You know, so I saw that as like an inside joke or like a shorthand or something like that, as opposed to this, like her work is her priority, which I don't know. Maybe again, mine might be too generous of a reading. But no, that's super interesting. I hadn't thought about it as that line being like super literal.
Mm, interesting, interesting. But I think it represents to me how this, and of course we see just a certain series of segments of their lives together, but I feel like there's so much that revolves around Nora and their relationship,
Mhm.
and the way they both connect on their passion for writing and whatnot, but so much is revolving around her and how he serves her, and maybe that's the just screenwriting choices. I understand that this movie's about her journey, but um I think it comes off to me as her having so much slack to make so many of these decisions, and to choose the things that she needs, and so it doesn't feel balanced. Like Arthur's there to serve her ambitions, he's there to provide grace for her and space for her. Like it's she seems to um have so much that is revolving around her in their relationship and their dynamic together, um which I just felt like it was hard for me to get on board with. I think this also translates over to the relationship that she has with Haesung, which is so much of the first part of this movie. Um, I feel like I didn't know them as individual people, and I only knew them in context of their relationship to each other. It's almost like we spend so much time with them, but I still felt like I didn't know who they were. The defining trait for Nora is basically that she wants to become a writer, and we don't. I didn't feel like I knew that much more about her, and was like interested in other aspects of her. And then with Haesung too, like what what else do we know about him other than he has this past with Nora? So the characters to me were hard for me to get really engaged with, which I think was part of the challenge because the rest of the movie is basically a actor play just focused on these people and their feelings and their emotions and this destiny that they believe in, which I I think felt was like a flimsy foundation for the rest of the story to work for me.
No, I get that. That makes sense to me. I feel like I knew Nora enough, and it might just be because I also have aspirations as a writer, and I am a pretty driven, ambitious person, and I will put like my work and my dreams above everything else. So there's like a lot of things that Nora has that I relate to. So maybe that was just easier for me to just go on this ride with her, because I think so many of her character traits are ones that I share. Um, but I definitely felt that way about Hae Sung. Like I knew that they had this past, but the whole time I'm going like, why are you why are you doing this? Like, I don't have this deep emotional attachment to him. I don't think that he fits well into your life, into who you have become. So why are you doing this? And for me it was satisfying to see her really come to that same conclusion, and making it clear, the girl that he fell in love with isn't here anymore. And I think that her realizing that, uh, made it satisfying for me. I think if she had gone further into reminiscing and trying to pursue Hae-sung, then I would have some very strong feels about this movie. Um, but I struggled with the Hae-sung character. There wasn't enough there for me to understand why it was like, if I have Hae-sung and Arthur compared to each other, I'm gonna choose Arthur every time because I feel like I know him. I don't really know Hae-sung other than their connection. So it did make it feel a little imbalanced for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There's not that much more that we know, and there's so much exposition of their FaceTime, or I guess it wasn't FaceTime, it was
Yeah.
Skype conversations where we still didn't learn that much about them. Like, and also the amount of like, I know there was like it was a montage, but people don't talk the way that they talk. The way that they're so earnest with how they express their
Yeah.
thoughts to each other, like constantly.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, I don't. I that didn't work for me at all, which really made it hard for me to believe in this connection that they have, because I actually think that the films that are able to create dialogue that isn't so on the nose and isn't so explicit with how human beings communicate work better, because there's actually more that's able to be communicated about how they feel, because they aren't exactly saying how they really feel. And it's easier for me to believe it, it's easier for me to buy into it, and it actually makes the moments where they are speaking so raw and unfiltered and so earnestly feel that much more meaningful, because there's a contrast. Like they there's this dance that they're doing around, where these little comments where we as the viewers know how they feel and how they're expressing it, and they both know, but they aren't saying so explicitly like, I miss you. Like the amount that it's like 20 minutes of like very earnest human expression and dialogue, which was, it's just not how human beings are, like we don't express that explicitly all the time and that seriously. Like all of their conversations are so intense and serious and like full expressions of their true hearts constantly. And that's a lot for 20 minutes of montage, And I think it actually reduces the impact of what this movie really wants to communicate, which is this like really deep connection that they have. It actually takes away from that, for me personally.
I love it. I love that it was like too emotional. And you were like, no, get it away.
I'm like, who talks like this? I get if you want to do a scene or two, ooh, tug on the heartstrings,
Yeah.
but the law of diminishing return is definitely at play here.
Yeah, I was just thinking like, oh wow, like as a person who struggles to express my emotions, like good job guys. That's great.
Hmm.
Thank you for being so forthcoming and in tune with what you're feeling, cuz that is not something that I'm good at. So,
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, yeah man, you if you are that emotionally aware, go for it. That's great. Make us all better, please.
And I'm like, I call bullshit. I call bullshit.
Yeah. That's
I don't
fair.
buy it. Therefore, I don't buy the characters. It's the like logical steps that happen to my brain. And we're only 30 minutes into this movie. I'm like,
Oh
no, we
man.
don't, this is not real. People don't talk this way.
I love it. I am shocked though that this didn't work for you. It
Yeah.
makes sense though. Like I get it, but I am surprised. This is
Yeah.
great.
It really didn't work for me. I was so spicy the whole time. Okay. while we're on the topic of Haesung, pet peeve, okay? Another soapbox
Ooh,
that I need to stand on
yes, please.
here is at the end of this movie, they've had this conversation. There is an understanding that they come to of like, yes, we are not meant for each other in this life. And then Homeboy wants to reopen this box that they achieved closure in and be like,
Mhm.
but are we sowing foundations for us to be together in a future life? Like, are we creating yin yang for our future life? And I just think it's unhealthy. It's unhealthy for both of them, and it's incredibly unwise for him to reopen those questions and wonderings and reminiscing and nostalgia. Like, they both need to emotionally like understand what the choices that they've made for their lives, the circumstances that have ensued for their lives, and begin to move forward. And so that's why it was heartbreaking for me to see Nora break down at the end when she ends up with Arthur, because I just feel like the doom and gloom of like this is going to be even harder for her. And Haesung, if he really cared for her and loved her, would not make it harder for her. And to make it easier for her to emotionally move on and be happy and choose her relationship that she has right now, that she's chosen, and that they both agreed is what's best for them. Like for him to reopen those doors again, not even for this life, but just, those questions again. I just am like, this is not wise for either of you, and I don't think it's very loving for you to have done that and then create more emotional strife for Nora.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I think in that scene, I again was more focused on Nora, and just throughout the film, we've seen her make these choices, especially with Haesung, when they're Skyping very emotionally with each other, and she
Very
calls it.
emotional Skyping happens in this movie, everyone.
And then she decides to call it off, and she sets that boundary. And then here at the end is an opportunity for her to choose the opposite, and to keep that door open, and she chooses to keep it firmly shut. And so I really appreciated that for her as a character, that she had the strength to do that, to keep with what they had decided, even though Hae-sung was doing this really crappy thing. I was just, I was impressed with her for keeping that door shut and not even cracking it open a little bit.
Mm.
Um, and then the fact that it's followed up with her, just sobbing into Arthur, like,
Oh,
for for me, that was this sign of like Arthur being her safe space, and where she could just like melt and doesn't
mhm,
have to be strong anymore. And so I thought that that was just a really sweet way to end it, and showing once again the depth of their relationship as she is making a choice to like re-up her commitment to that relationship. I don't know. I thought that that was a really good way to end it, even though it's pretty crappy for both of them.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think that again, emotions are weird and complicated, and we don't, as human beings, don't behave rationally, and we don't make good choices, basically. But I think it's like also further confirmation that shows the contrast between Arthur and Haesung. Like they are
Hmm.
really
Yeah.
foils to each other because Haesung is so emotionally driven by his choices. Arthur is not, right? Like Arthur is willing to be stable and and strong and a foundation for her. And I think what's fascinating is that Arthur also expresses his hurts. Like he's not brushing it on the rug. He expresses pretty clearly to Nora, "This is hard for me, and of course I don't like this," right? But yet he chooses to put that aside and not erupt out of those emotions, and so that he is able to give that space for Nora to explore and find what she needs. I mean, he even says it to Hae-sung when they're at that bar, and I guess she's in the bathroom or she's somewhere else, where he says, this was like this was right for both of you. This was good for both of you. And he can see that, and he chooses that despite his own feelings. Hae-sung can't, like, he actually does the opposite. I think maybe he doesn't see what's good for Nora, but if he were to really see and love her better and more clearly, he would see that what she needs right now is to be pushed and nudged into and fully given to her other life, and to not keep giving her these like open doors and open channels in her brain to go back and wander to and wonder to what life would could be like with him. That's what she needs. But he's not, he's driven by his emotions and his feelings for her. And what it ends up doing is, I think, hurting her in more ways, because he's caught up in what he feels in that moment right before he gets in the Uber, is his curiosities. That's not what she needs to hear right now. And so I think it further shows the difference in selflessness, in maturity levels, in the ability for them to choose wisely for the person that they care about. Further creates that gap between Arthur and Haesung as foils to each other.
Mm-hmm. No, that's so good. And I think they both also the thing that I kept thinking about is the the difference between fantasy and reality,
Yeah.
and so it's this like what could have been with Nora and Haesung and the reality of the life that she has with
Mm-hmm.
Arthur. And we see her, giving into that fantasy for a little bit and hanging out with Haesung and reminiscing and doing all of the things, but then seeing the beauty amidst the difficulty of the reality of her relationship with Arthur. And I like the way that the film is contrasting those two things, and we see that she lands on solid ground. She lands back in reality, and presumably comes to appreciate her marriage with Arthur even more after this whole interaction. And I appreciated that, because I feel like so many films with a similar plot line lean fully into the what ifs and lean fully into the fantasy and make it into this grand beautiful thing, and so then they give up the reality that they've built and they go and live in the fantasy. And I don't know, I like that this film accepts that each choice has like positives and negatives, and each choice requires sacrifice but also opens up the potential for something else. And we see Nora fully accepting those choices and embracing her reality instead of running away into the fantasy. And I thought that that was really good, and a helpful thing to have when we usually don't see that in films.
Yeah, that's so good. It reminds me a lot of Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I was thinking a lot about
Mm-hmm.
in this movie, especially during the bar scene where they're talking about, like, what if in another life we were, um, in a political relationship and we hated each other, and what if we were blah blah blah, and they're like
Mm-hmm.
imagining all the other versions of themselves. And Everything Everywhere All at Once, one of, that subplot line around Michelle Yeoh's character and her husband, and what they would be like in other strands of the multiverse, it's very in line with the themes in this movie as well, around like wondering what another version of yourself would be like, and who they would end up with, and what kind of life that they would build. And um, I think that there's the fact that these movies have come out as of late, and just in general, the idea of the multiverse has come with full force in our current art and storytelling, is like pretty fascinating to me. There's something there around wondering about our circumstances in our other lifetimes that seems to be resonating, and seems to be a place that creators are also letting their minds wander to. And I just wonder why that is. It feels kind of um, interestingly reflective of maybe where our psyches at as a culture, that we wonder about our other selves and our other lifetimes. Um, Maybe it's nostalgia, maybe it's um, the comfort of fantasy, maybe it's escapism. Like, I don't know, but there's something there. There's a there, that I think is interesting to think about.
And I love that this movie's version is Inyan, which is ancient and this long-standing concept. And we're able to see that same concept showing up in our world today in the multiverse. So this is a pattern that has existed across centuries and across cultures, and yet we are still somehow fascinated with this idea of other versions of us and what they are doing, past selves, future selves, however you want to frame it. But it is interesting that there is this human desire to imagine what could have been or what might be, and then we just frame it in different ways depending on our context and our time and our culture.
Yeah. Which, in a meta way, movies are just multiverses for us to like
Hmm.
dip our little toes
Yep.
into for 2 hours and then emerge back into our strand that we are in right now. Like it scratches that same itch, that same desire for fantasy and wondering about what other lives that we haven't lived, but that we get to live for 2 hours. So yeah, there's something fascinating there for sure.
Hmm. It is fun to be able to explore, like, what if, in our own lives, and then, like you said, like with movies, inhabit another story for a little while and
Hmm.
and live their life essentially for 2 hours. It's such a cool thing that we're able to do with stories, with language, now with movies and TV and all of these things, uh, that we are able to create these other worlds, these other experiences that we can live in for a little bit and learn and grow and, I don't know, reflect on our own worlds, all because of a story. It's incredibly powerful. It's so cool.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I think what's important that I think was good in this film, that Nora makes a decision that I think made Haesung's final scene more frustrating to me, is that ultimately the entertaining of those ideas is natural human instinct, but we ultimately have to choose to commit ourselves
Hmm.
to the lives, to the people that we've been given, and that there's a amount that we no longer should be allowing ourselves to wander into the what ifs, and there are consequences to them. And I think that's maybe why um, certain moments in the scene in this movie were frustrating me, because the consequences of that, I think, are not insignificant. And it's easy to focus on the excitement of the what ifs and and on all of that, but that ultimately that there's open doors that are no longer healthy to keep open, and there are like choices and commitments that you need to make to the strand of the multiverse that you're in. And I think that's that's why certain aspects of this movie felt more frustrating, and ultimately that the choice that they make, that when this movie was going on, I was like, there's only one version of this ending that I'm going to be satisfied with. And
Hmm. Yep.
if they make any other choice, I'm going to be really way more spicy than I already am. But I think that that's a key aspect of Everything Everywhere All at Once theme as well, which is that ultimately it's all those other versions of Michelle Yeoh and her husband's life exist, but she chooses the small little one that they have, the little peaceful life that they've built in this multiverse. That's what we ultimately need to land on.
Hmm. No, that's really good. And I think I when I was watching Past Lives, I think I was comparing it to other, like, romantic films which I think are often toxic
Yeah.
and very, very problematic. So I think I had lower expectations for this film,
Mm.
as opposed to actually viewing it within the context of real life. You know, like I set my bar lower than I think you did, which I think affects my experience with this film because it didn't. I mean, yeah, there are some like tropey bits, but it avoids some of the big potholes that we often see in other romantic films, and I was appreciative of that. But
Yes.
when I compare it to real life, is when it becomes a bit more problematic.
Mm. That
Yeah.
is fascinating. Yeah, because this Past Lives is the closer to better decision making version of The Notebook, right? Thematically,
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah.
Thematically, honestly, structurally, the same. Same,
Yeah.
same. Boy from past,
Mhm.
from your younger self,
Mhm.
emerges out of the woodworks. You entertain
Builds
the
her a
idea.
house.
Builds her a
But he built her a house, Jen. You're supposed to love him because he built a house. It's so stupid. Thankfully, Haesung did not build Nora a house,
No,
so
but he
she's
did get
fine.
on, like, a 16-hour flight, so, you
Hey
know,
man, he
that's
he
that's
missed
a
his
journey.
shot. She gave him so many opportunities to shoot his shot 12
That's
years
true.
ago, and he
That's
did
true.
not take any of those shots. So he took a 16-hour flight 12 years too late. Suck it up, buddy. Like, he didn't build her a house, so she couldn't choose him. These are the rules of the Notebook universe.
That is
This is
true.
what it
That is
is.
true. That is true, and I think Lon and Arthur need to, like, go out for some beers together and just rant together. Little support group situation happening there, you know?
Amazing. We got it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, no, that's a fabulous point, though, which is that a lot of other romantic movies would go so much farther, like, as far as how much Nora and Haesung explore their connection and their past and all that kind of stuff. They would make a lot more egregious choices than they do in this movie. So maybe that's what it is. You watch this movie comparing it to uh, other romantic movies
Mhm.
like The Notebook,
Yes.
and I was comparing it to choices that human beings make. And
Yes.
first of all, neither of these two people behave like human beings. So there's that. So we're building on
They're
that foundation.
robots. It's
Mhm.
it's robot love. It's different.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Other things that you found your thoughts really dwelling on after the movie ended, or maybe during the movie.
Okay, so since you love Arthur so much, can we talk about Arthur some more? Um, I
Yes.
I really appreciated his character as as a white person because he I think represents a a good depiction of an ally, and I feel like we don't get a lot of those. We're starting to see that more and more in film and TV, but we don't have a lot to choose from. But I feel like Arthur is a good example of that, and I feel like it's also an example of what it is like to be in a relationship of a person of a different ethnicity, or country of origin. And I love the way that he loves Nora for who she is, and he also takes time to appreciate and learn where she came from. And he has gone out of his way to embrace parts of her culture instead of just accepting her to fully assimilate to being an American. And so I love those little things that were included throughout where we learn just how loving he is to her and how he wants to learn more about Korea and learn Korean even so that he can communicate to her better and in a different way. So I loved those little moments of what it looks like to honor somebody's culture and embrace them for who they are all at the same time.
Homeboy wants to learn even more Korean to understand her sleep talking.
Adorable.
Wow.
I mean,
No,
that's
I think that's
intense,
really
man.
beautiful. And I think what I also appreciate about him is that he has the humility to recognize that there's parts of her that he will never understand,
Mm-hmm.
and doesn't expect to or try to like pretend to know every aspect of her, and especially like her life back in Korea and that journey of immigrating. Like he's very clear-eyed about the fact that he may never understand fully, but he will try. And that effort and that time and investment is how he can love her. It's not even attempting to try and understand every aspect, but the humility to know that and express that so clearly, I thought was really fabulous as well. Because I think sometimes when people put in the effort, then they assume that they now know, and they can understand, and they kind of give themselves a pat on the back, and assume that that's enough, and that there's a fullness that they know about you now. And I appreciate that he was like, I'm gonna do all these things, but I also will never know fully. And there's a whole life that you had that I don't even understand as well. Like that humility to recognize that, I thought was really great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that willingness to learn, the willingness to be wrong. Even like I loved when he was trying to speak in Korean to Haesung, and Haesung could not understand what he was saying because his Korean was so bad. But
Hmm.
that didn't dissuade Arthur from continuing to try. And I
Hmm.
thought again that was just another good character revealing moment of, like you said, his humility, but his willingness not to give up even when he's uncomfortable or when things aren't going right.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. And I think he also, in that scene when they're talking in bed late at night, I think he said something along the lines of, or to the gist of, like, there are aspects that Heisan can probably give you that I know I can't. And I thought that was just like, again, the humility to be able to express that so clearly as a man. Like, we don't see that often, like there's often this peacocking and this posturing, and they both try and be everything to Nora, and he's secure enough in himself to know what he can give her and the things that he can't. And I thought that was really great as well. Just not even the like intercultural bridge, but just as a man, to be able to say clearly, there's aspects that I can't give you, and I'm aware of them, and can express that clearly, but I'm secure in these other areas that I know I can provide for you. I thought that was really great as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
And he pays for the drinks at the bar for her ex lover. Like, come on.
what a stand-up dude, you know? And like he's a an author, she's a playwright. They're living in this crappy apartment in Manhattan or something. And I mean, you got to imagine that money is tight. So
Mhm.
like how much of their monthly eating out budget did they spend on having dinner and drinks with Haesung? Like that's a pretty big sacrifice right there.
Mhm.
Like it's
Mhm.
a whole ruined evening of awkwardness, and you don't have that money to spend on future date nights with just you and her where you're not
Yeah.
third wheeling it up. I mean, that's a big sacrifice there.
Mhm. Mhm. I thought it was also so fascinating that when she's not present and she's, at the loo or whatnot, and they have that conversation, I thought it was interesting that both of them were not explicitly territorial. I think that
Yeah.
that's what would easily happen in another version of this movie, is that these two men are like kind of side eyeing each other, and like territorial, and Nora becomes like this piece of um, property that both of them are trying to like claim their ownership of, and both of them felt so like hands wide open of, it's her, it's about her, it's her choices, and neither of them feel the need to like posture with each other. I just thought that was like commendable for both of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's not really toxic masculinity in this film, which
Yeah.
was really a breath of fresh air.
Yes.
Because I feel like, again, like the other versions of this movie are these two dudes fighting over this chick.
Yep.
And instead, this movie is not about that. This movie is
Mhm.
about Nora and her exploring these two sides of her and ultimately choosing the right choice. Um, so it was, again, nice to see male characters that don't have to have this like toxic bravado that we so often see in movies.
Yep. And I think it's more impressive that Arthur is who's assumedly grown up in the U.S. that and is around that type of peacocking more prevalently in our culture and Western culture. I just thought that like his ability to still be so giving and um, calm and stable about it, I just thought that was really great. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the bar is so low. It's like, yes, this should this should not feel so impressive to us. But you're right in
Right?
that most, well, not most, a lot of romance movies, like we don't see any of this type of behavior at all. So it feels like the bar is very low. you know?
Yeah. Yeah, the bar is quite low. We have had a lot of bad examples of romance in movies.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of times they're very toxic, they're dysfunctional, we're making choices that are going to be very, very bad in the long run. And so it was nice to see, even though Nora makes mistakes throughout this movie, that ultimately she makes the healthy choice. And we see some level of emotional awareness and being able to choose the healthy path forward rather than leaning into the high of an emotion and choosing dysfunction. Again,
Hmm.
the bar is very, very low, but it was nice to see that this movie like clears the bar. It's not hitting
Yes.
the bar, it very clearly clears it. uh and hopefully we can do better in the future,
Hmm.
but
And you know why the bar is so low?
why?
Because it's dramatic to see people
Ugh,
fight,
it's so
right?
annoying.
It's dramatic to like get lost in the fantasy. This movie is so boring in comparison. The two men sit at a bar
Mhm.
calmly and have a quiet, respectful
Yeah,
conversation. You know, like
yeah, it's great. Yes,
only an
please.
A24, like contemplative, slow, like this works because of that. You know, like the big explosive confrontation in Allie and Noah in the Notebook, and then Lon and her mother showing up. Like, of course, that's more exciting to watch. It's a fireworks show, and this
Yeah, he
is
built her a house, Jen.
well. And then Lon comes storming through in his like military suit. You know, like where is she? Where is she? The mother.
It's so dumb.
Yeah, this
Yeah,
is
but
far more
it's
calm and respectful.
yeah. Which I don't know. I am also just 800 years old in my soul. So, a calm conversation at a bar is way more exciting to me. Uh but I think that we're seeing more and more films like this where it's a little bit more true to life. Like we're not into real life yet, but we're baby stepping our way there. And I think that's good that we're able to see these different types of relationships because like we were saying before, you inhabit this story for a little bit and that shapes you. And so I feel
Mm,
like for so many years we've been shaped by these really, really toxic relationships that we spend time with in movies and TV. And so to start to see more and more films that are about healthier relationships with very flawed human protagonists who make mistakes but then are able to sort those out in a more healthy manner, I think is really, really good for us
mm.
because then we're modeling a better way of doing relationships that will hopefully help us, reframe our own relationships and maybe borrow some things from these movies and do things in a bit more of a healthy way,
That's very
hopefully.
true. No, that's so good. That's so good. We need it. We need it because we've got a slew of foundation laid of not so great examples of conflict management,
Yes.
um,
Yep. Boundaries,
lack of commitment,
emotions.
boundaries. Oh yeah. Oh
We got a
yeah.
lot. We got a lot of work to do.
We got a
Uh,
lot of undoing to do.
but it is cool to see
Yeah.
how films are shifting, and we're getting more diverse stories, and I think that includes these different types of stories that frame relationships a little bit differently.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Another last thoughts about past lives.
uh when they are having that conversation in bed,
Yeah.
Arthur is sitting up with his like pillows piled and his head is resting against the wall. And then
Mm.
like he shifts down a little bit and you can see the wall where his head was. And then there's a little spot where you can see where his head was resting. There's like a little like dark circle where his head was resting
Oh.
against the wall. And it's literally all I could focus on in
Oh
that scene,
my.
where I
From
was like,
sweat?
okay, I don't know. I was like, did
Oh.
did you just like take a shower and your hair was wet? Were you sweating? Was this product in your hair? Like what is this substance that is now on the wall from your hair? Because I have questions, which was not the point of the
Oh.
scene, but
No, that was a key scene.
I know. But there was a spot on the wall. And
It's
so
just a sweaty dude.
honestly, it
I
happens.
feel that.
I
I
get
feel
it.
that. I know. I mean, it's a very emotionally intense conversation. I would be
That's
sweating too.
true.
Heck.
And maybe you sweat from the back of your head.
Yes. So really, that shot was meant to show Arthur's
Oh,
humanity.
yeah.
He too is a human. It's he's not a superhero. Contrary to popular belief, he is a human person.
He is. He is. Which makes his superhero like acts all the more impressive because
Mm-hmm.
he is just a man.
Yes.
He sweats just like you
Too.
and I do.
Yes. So that is a key visual
Mm-hmm.
component of this movie.
Thank you for helping me to unpack that and better understand Arthur as a character from that spot on the wall.
By the way, the visuals in this scene, in this entire, not the scene, in this entire movie
Oh,
are absolutely stunning.
gorgeous.
We
Yeah.
haven't got a chance to talk about that because I was just being spicy the whole time, but they are gorgeous. And I feel like on a second watch, I think there's so many shots that would feel even more meaningful. Like this, I had After Sun in my head a little bit because that film is so visually poetic, and I think that Past Lives is as well. There's that shot of Nora and Haesung in front of a carousel at the
Mm-hmm.
park,
Yeah.
and I was like, this is that carousel is, just emanating with meaning for these two childhood ex friends, lovers. And I think there's so many other scenes like that, but there's the slow visual pace, the score just really adds to the like atmosphere of this movie, which I think really worked for this sense of like nostalgia and fantasy and connection and contemplative, all that stuff that is very much part of like the atmosphere of the ambiance of this movie.
Yeah, what's so funny is I kept thinking about the farewell while watching this,
Mm,
which should have clued me into the fact that you weren't going to like this movie because you also had issues with the farewell.
I
So
did.
I should have been more prepared for this.
Oh
Reflecting
man.
back on it, uh, the clues were there. I just didn't put them together.
I now and the whole time this movie's happening, I'm just like, I want to love this. I want to love this, but I'm not. But I want to. The desire was there. You know?
Okay, so if you ever watch it again, think
Just
about
think
the
about the notebook.
notebook.
Yeah.
That's
Maybe that's key. I'll
that's
watch the
yeah,
notebook right before this movie.
exactly. Yes.
And I'll just be so proud of every character in this movie. Just clapping the whole time.
It's true.
Yes. Good
It'll be
job,
it'll be a
everybody.
great double feature.
Good job.
You start with frustration and then you end with a little bit of hope for humanity.
Yes.
It's great.
Yes. And I'll stop the movie when they're waiting for the Uber. Like, I'll just end the movie there. I'll just turn it off then. So they don't have a
Oh,
conversation around their future lives.
perfect.
Right?
Yeah.
That seems great.
Yeah, that's great.
The
I think
movie ends with them staring at each other. Cut to credits.
great. Okay, we have a plan to turn this movie around for you.
All right. Well, this is our review and discussion of Past Lives. You can find it available to stream on a whole host of streaming platforms. Available to rent, I'll mention. Available to rent or purchase. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. Everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you hung out with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about Past Lives. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at MoviesAndUsPod, or email us at moviesandUsPod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss a filmmaking masterpiece, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, much anticipated. Sarah, it's been on our list for a while.
Yeah, this is going to be a cinematic experience for sure.
This might be on your top 10 list for the end of 2023.
Hey, anything can happen. So we will see what this gem of a movie is going to be.
I mean, I always have a slot on my top 10 list for just like movies that are a great time, that just had a lot of fun in.
That's true.
You know? So Concrete Cowboy was on there one time. This might be the year for Winnie the Pooh and Honey.
We will find out. We will find out. Is this going to live up to our expectations?
We will see. But this has been on our 2-track list for probably many months now.
It's true. I can't remember.
I think since February, March.
Yeah.
So wow, the time has come.
The time has come, and it's perfect for spooky season.
Spooky season.
Here we are.
So if you too would like your childhood to be ruined, join us next week for a conversation about Winnie the Pooh and Honey. All right, we'll see y'all next week.